Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us in this panel conversation around machine learning and AI, art galleries, and music festivals retrospect, and which is part of ethical considerations and creative applications of computer vision workshop at CVPR this year, 2022. And yeah, thanks for being with us. And I wanted to ask panelists to introduce yourself. Please, I would start with Anna.
Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. I'm Anna. Thank you, Nigar, for inviting us and bringing us together. I'm a research scientist on the Magenta project at Google Brain. We focus a lot on music and art and generation and building tools for artists. I'm also adjunct professor at Mila through University of UDM, University in Montreal. So I also supervise graduate students doing research in this space. I'm originally a composer. I did a music composition undergrad and in grad school also experimented with a lot of different ways of composing, like electronic music, live kind of interactions with Maximus P and others. So I'm really interested in this intersection of generative models, human computer interaction, and creative practice.
So much. And Anna, please also like mention that you organizing many very interesting events related to music festivals and the kind of events that you were organizing. Could you also add on this?
Yeah, thank you. Adhikar. Yeah, I'm also a co-organizer for the AI Song Contest. This is the third year we're doing it, and I'll in this panel talk some about how we're thinking of this as kind of a platform for supporting a human AI co-creativity, and also bringing artists, scientists in the loop in a conversation together.
Thank you so much. And right, Seja, I mean, many people may know about your name from Timnit's talks, always like talking about this spatial apartheid work. Uh, and yeah, please introduce yourself and let us know about yourself, your work.
Yes. Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm Raiseja. I'm a research fellow at the Dare Institute, and I mostly work on data curation methods. So, thinking about how we involve communities in curating data sets that we use for machine learning. So, I've been working a lot on spatial apartheid work. So, it's more around uh, analyzing the effects of spatial segregation in South Africa over time. So we're looking at satellite imagery and then just trying to see if we can actually capture some of these effects using machine learning and other techniques, like involving collaborators from like social sciences, people from the community, and just involving people who are part of the data to evaluate the work that we do.
Thank you. And Mohammed, please also introduce yourself.
First, I would like to thank you for organizing this needed discussion. I'm pleased to be with you. I think I met most of you for the first time. I of course interacted with you before, Nigar, so I'm pleased to make new friends. I am Mohammed Al Hosseini. I'm currently an assistant professor of computer science at KAUST, and I manage a group that focuses on what I would call imagination supervised learning. And part of that I focus on how do we push machines to go beyond the generations that exist in the training data, mostly in the creative vision aspect, like art generation, fashion generation, etc. Um, Interestingly, I started on that maybe only like in 2017, maybe 5 years ago, where we introduced CAN creative adversarial networks, and then we had a number of follow up from there, and it has some interesting connections to some of the earlier work I have been doing. I didn't work in art generation before that, but I did work on a task called zero shot learning, which is about recognizing unseen visual object categories. So I kind of shifted, maybe extended what I have been working on from recognizing the unseen to generating the unseen in some sense. Um, I have, apart from that, I have been like I started to get excited in this space and engage in workshops that are related, and also recently last year together with like a larger number of partners, we organized the SAI Factory, which is more like it started as a hackathon, but it turns out to be much more than that. It was a hackathon followed by a symposium. We invited people, and the goal for it is to bring together artists and scientists to speak to each other, so that we hopefully accelerate our understanding of the creative like artistic space, and the role of AI there, and how it may help and solve some of these debates about how this can be useful technology. And of course, one of the major aspects that's been discussed frequently are the ethical consideration, which is a reason why we are discussing it today. So thank you for bringing this topic into focus.
Thank you. And Andy?
Yeah, I'm Andrew Smart, and I'm a researcher on the social impact and human rights team at Google, which is in the bigger responsible AI human-centered technology team, which Negar is part of as well. And yeah, it's hard to know where to start, but I'm really interested in, so I started out as a painter, and I went to art school for a while, and I'm also a musician, but then I went into cognitive neuroscience, and I worked in aerospace for a while, and then I worked in medical devices, and all the while kind of starting to use machine learning in these various ways, and then ended up at Google doing this research where all of these backgrounds are kind of relevant, and I'm able to try to, I guess, leverage all this stuff. So I'm very interested in these topics. I don't claim expertise in any of them, but my research is really, I would say it's about trying to, how do we use social understanding and social theory and translate that into more practical, I guess, engineering techniques so that we can try to get the understanding into the teams that are building these giant models at Google and building these massive systems that are doing stuff in society that we don't really understand. So I would say, yeah, I'm trying to really take, like, understand critical theory, understand value sensitive design, and then translate those ideas into things that the engineers here can, or even they not necessarily understand really, but at least give them tools to help them do that. But I'm very interested in the work that you're all doing, and I love music, and I love art, and I love this, and I'm really fascinated by this idea of authorship. Like I was talking with Negar a bit about the who's the author, in these systems. That's a very interesting question. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And also, Ramya is a co-organizer with us and is joining as co-moderator with me. Please have an intro.
Oh, hi everyone, I'm Ramya. I'm a researcher in Fujitsu Research of America, where I work on topics related to AI ethics, mostly on the creativity related aspects, like what goes into data. Part of it is related to data set curations, algorithms, what kind of biases can arise out of it. So I'm co-organizing this with Negar, and very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to start the questions with a question related to art galleries and festivals, music festivals. So it might be most interesting for would be interesting for probably like more people, but I would start with Anna and Mohammed. So the question is that I want to actually know, when people when you want to invite people to submit their works in this kind of art galleries or music festivals, how do you outreach? Like, how do you make sure that you are reaching out to communities that expand beyond your own network, because like that was the area that I had issue with, like when I was when I was co-organizing this workshop, like ethical considerations and creative applications of computer vision, or computer vision for fashion, art, and design during the last few years, that it was mainly like people who I knew, or like the community who are connected mainly with me. Like, how do you do the outreach? How do you reach out to artists, and how do you cover? Or how do you think that it should be covered to reach out to a broader community for participation?
So, Anna, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start, and maybe we can
Sure.
iterate. That's a really good question. Maybe I'll give a little bit of history of how the AI song contest started, and maybe that gives some context. So it started 3 years ago, and I think there was like there has been a lot of interest around kind of music and generative models, and that was around the time where there was kind of a lot of generative models coming out that can that's kind of providing a variety of entry points for artists to kind of work with these models. At the same time, there was a lot of tool building. So some of these models are beginning to be integrated in the tools that musicians use, and so it can be part of the workflow. So we started a lot kind of in the community. So among music information, I guess in music tech, a lot of the work traditionally has been kind of as part of music information retrieval, like being able to recommend relevant songs. So at that community, we had a conference every year, and it happened to be in the Netherlands, where the Netherlands had won the Eurovision the previous year. So so there was a lot of public interest in kind of the contest, and the broadcasters in the Netherlands wanted to do something different for hosting that year. So because there was so much excitement around kind of AI and music, so they actually proposed the idea, and then they came to the conference to kind of launch the contest. So that kind of built a bridge between like the TV broadcasters and the artists, and also the researchers who are like deep in the music tech, and kind of a couple of teams built kind of collaborations there. And also there's music tech and music kind of and artistic practice in the music departments are usually pretty it's a field with a long tradition. So there's a big kind of community there. That's so yeah, I guess those are kind of some of the pieces that initially made it possible for us to kind of come together.
Thanks, Anna. And Mohammed.
All right. I think from my perspective, it I think it's quite similar to what Anna mentioned. Maybe the details are a little different, but what happened is that I started to first. I'm not originally an artist, I would say, but I turned out to get into the arts domain in 2017, where I started to be more like an AI artist in some sense during this time. So I started to get to know people through like AI art exhibits, the Europe's creativity workshop, and where it brings are already venues that brings together artists and AI engineers, and I love that. Like love that making this having this discussion, because it tries to bring this is an interdisciplinary area, and I think having some joint discussion helps us close the loop and making this technology useful for all. And then later in 2020, I happened to be invited to an international challenge for artists as a mostly not as an organizer, but as a judge and speaker panelist. and I get to know that was an opportunity for me to get to know many more artists, and from there, later in last year, maybe we got more ready to start something, and that was this SAI factory. We started to reach out to people who we connected to previously, the machine learning, like mailing list, and I think I would say it was very important to partner also with a number of popular artists, including Christophe, who did put a huge effort to run the SAI factory, in terms of connecting more with artists in Europe and others. So that helps in the outreach a lot, and we received in the 2020 event. More than 2,000 applications, and in the 2021 about 600. So I think it's not a single person effort. It's everybody really that helped in telling others. So yeah.
And so some people actually believe that generative arts may replace artistic creation by their scale and speed. Some believe generative models are just tools of creation. Like, I mean, as you mentioned, like, okay, so consider them as like a tool that helps artists. I want to have your thoughts, and I also want to continue conversation around this. So what do you consider this generative art? Is it going to replace traditional artists? Is it going to help them? Should I call, or like you volunteer? Andy?
I know you're picking on me. So I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think this question comes up a lot when you have new technology. And I remember the debate around people were generating music from DNA sequences. I don't know if you remember this, but everyone was like, it's neat, but the music isn't very good. So I think the aesthetic judgment doesn't necessarily change just because it's like if the music affects you or has an impact. And to me, I guess it comes back to feelings and emotions and the experience. And it's sort of irrelevant that sometimes how it's generated, but sometimes that's what the piece is about. It's about the technique. And that's a neat, sometimes there's this intellectual thrill about like, oh, wow, that system is doing this, and then the artist does this, and then the system does that. And isn't that cool? And, other art, I think, is about more visceral, punching you in the stomach type experiences. And so I mean, I don't think it will replace necessarily artists. I see the risk to me might be some of these systems where I could see it replacing stock photography or stock music, where you could just say to the system, hey, give me a picture of this, or give me a song about this. And like commercial jingles, or like cases where the intellect, like the power of the artist is not as important, maybe that would replace, where you could more in the advertising, commercial art, or graphic design, maybe this is more of a risk. But I think, at least in my opinion, where art is about human experience, I don't think it will replace. But again, if you have the system that's creating really powerful art that's in conversation with art history and becomes part of that canon, I mean, maybe it could coexist. I don't necessarily see it as a risk of replacing artists, because I still have favorite painters that are human painters that I love. And I don't, although there's work, I know my friend Alex, he generates paintings using models like StyleGAN or different things. Then he sends those to China, where human painters paint the paintings. They get sent back here, and he sells those in galleries. So it's kind of a comment on iPhone production, and like, and he's like, who's the artist here? Is it me? I don't know. But he sells the paintings. They're real paintings, but it's not him doing anything necessarily, except the programming to get the generated art. So yeah.
Well, also, I suppose it's a form of expression. Is it like that's how we should also think about it? Like, how do you view art? Is it, do you value art because it's someone expressing something, and then you value that, and then versus a machine doing it, and then maybe there's no passion to the piece whatsoever. I mean, it feels like a mass generated thing. Um, I suppose people who view art as a form of expression, it might be a little bit disturbing, knowing that. But then otherwise, it just boils down to um, it just boils down to what you value. It's not like we're saying people are no longer allowed to create pieces anymore. It's just that there's another form of artwork or music, or and then if it's your thing, it's just an expansion. I mean, the world evolves, so you still have a right to choose however you want to choose.
Thanks, Raisisha. Ramya?
Oh, I just had a follow-up question to what Andy and Rasita just said. So Andy mentioned that, in response to the question on whether generative art can replace artists, Andy, you mentioned how it could help like art historians or type some application with art history. And Rasita, you just mentioned that it's a form of expression. So related to that, I have a question. Like, how do we make meaning of these generative artworks, especially if it is reflecting some kind of art historical concept or expressing someone's opinions, uh, uh, because it does not necessarily reflect established patterns as opposed to traditional arts. Like in traditional artists may have well-established schools and learned a few things, but that may not be the case in generative art. So how would one make meaning of these artworks? And because consumers largely make meaning from how it is reflecting certain established methodologies. So any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'll just say quickly that, I mean, and again, this is just my kind of peripheral knowledge, but, AI art and tech art hasn't really like penetrated the blue chip Art Basel world where the pieces go for millions. And like, I know a lot of the artists I know that work in tech feel excluded still by the blue chip art world. So that's an interesting, I don't know why that is yet. And I think it's changing slightly, but there's still this aspect of highbrow art looks down a little bit on tech AI art, at least right now. And I'm sure that's going to change. But so I think, like, to your point, Ramya, about the being, these art historical trends where there's still this, at least in that very rarefied art world, there's kind of a purist attitude still. I from my perspective, not that I'm an expert, but this is just from talking to
So
people.
there are still places where generative art you think cannot replace traditional artists, therefore.
At least in the art, I don't know if what I'm saying, the Art Basel world, where the like the big the galleries like Gagosian and like the big, the high, I don't know what you'd call that, the highbrow art world.
I suppose also how I think about it. Remember there was a time where people were hand making tiles or crockery plates and things, and then they got replaced by more machinery, mass production type of technology. But then there's still people who value handmade, and there's still a whole lot of value to like handmade items like that. But it hasn't really replaced like the value people put in them. Although there's just it serves a different market, I suppose.
This is very interesting, like, because this is like taking it, like when photography just came, like that some people were saying that it's gonna replace people who are painting or like drawing portraits, but it didn't replace it. It was just like another way of expressing or like having art, another tool. One question that I have is about like accessibility and availability of these tools. I mean, these tools are developed by machine learning researchers, and it's used by people who either are machine learning technologists or know people who are machine learning technologists. So how could we make these kind of tools more accessible and available for more artists? And then also like make sure in this process that we are still valuing the art of traditional artists. How this kind of outreach could be done to local artists who may not have the same kind of like access to these technologies. What are your thoughts about this?
I think maybe if these technologies are more available on the cloud without requiring heavy compute, that might make things much more available for people from everywhere to contribute. Another thing, I'm not sure if that platform exists, but if there's a platform that can facilitate, let's say, someone generated a piece of art that he or she likes and want to sell it, maybe either something that maybe a few clicks away can request this to be printed, or maybe offer this for some customers who could be interested to buy it or something like that. And maybe this operation is, I don't know, is managed somehow to people who are interested in that platform to request to buy it, and also there may exist some operation that get this printed on something and maybe ship it to some individual creators. Maybe that can be a route to increase the impact of this technology and makes it accessible. I think when it is accessible, it naturally will have more impact.
Anna?
Yeah, I'll combine like the previous question we were combining, discussing, and this one. I just wanted to maybe point out one thing I feel maybe like kind of differences between the art, like AI art and kind of AI in music, is that like in AI and art, like we have really impressive models that like with prompting, like we can really prototype a very interesting, like kind of something you would appreciate right away. With music, because music involves like many different components and there's many different genres. So far, for example, if you ask like Philip Glass, like, what do you think about the state of like AI generated music? His reaction is, it sounds like a sketch. It sounds like nobody's actually listening, because music really requires building up this like story, this trajectory that requires a lot of care and a lot of intention, and so what we see in the AI song contest, for example, is there's people are using many different kinds of models. There's no one go-to model that everybody's using or everybody's like hyped about. There's definitely more expressive models than others, and some models are used more often. But because every team has a different vision of how they want the human AI co-creativity to be, the intervention becomes very personalized. For example, like some teams like play with their voice. Some teams like really interested in the rhythm of speech and melody. Some teams are really interested in working with models that can generate very interesting textures and be able to curate the vibe and then kind of build around it. So and that's part of the idea of this song contest, is to really invite people to have a very wide range of approaches to kind of open up the space. And I guess part of that is getting researchers and musicians to be able to work together, so that it's not just one tool, but you have many different choices, and also the scientists can kind of help tailor the tools for the musicians, and I guess part of that is yeah, a lot of times it takes musicians quite a while to build a mental model about how the I guess how the ML models are actually working. So this collaboration is often super important in the creative process. Ramya.
Oh, you mentioned an interesting point, Anna, and so I got a new question. So it seems like based on the art form, whether it's music or a visual, there is some inherent difference in the way people receive it, right? Because like how they receive it, appreciate it, whether it's AI based or even completely a human form, right? So do you think this would, like, let's say if we consider poetry, AI generated poetry or some other art form, do you still think that they would have a difference, a striking difference? Like, do you see some kind of a popularity graph, like a visual getting higher appreciation compared to music, then maybe poetry or something like that, independent of all other biases or something? So, because are you saying that visuals are more powerful, therefore?
Yeah, thank you, Ramya, for the question. I think it helps me kind of clarify what I want to communicate. I think what I wanted to try to kind of capture is that the human AI co-creativity really shines in music because just the models itself, um, there's limitations, but at the same time, the models also do enable like new ways of working. Also enables like new kinds of sounds, new ways for people to interact with the music, and new ways to create really rich raw material. So for teams kind of are trying to find this sweet spot where like you really kind of have that amplification and have that extension um, kind of possibility. So I think in terms of the agency, it's a lot stronger, uh, and it's pretty clear. There's definitely still a spectrum in terms of like where the artist is coming in, how the artist is driving.
My session.
Yeah, I suppose the question actually sparked another thing that usually when you create art, for example, when you paint something, it's a solo process. So now you have to be attached to this machine learning engineer who probably, I mean, it's a unique sort of thing that you do. Now you have to attach it to this person. I wonder like how that, because I think it might, I mean, it might create something new collaboratively, but then it just takes away from that um, solo process that you usually get from creating like pieces. So how does it like I now I just wonder like how that how we expect artists to suddenly pair up or collaborate with like labs when they want to create something in that space.
I had a similar question of like, is the AI or the model an instrument, or is it like a new band member, or like a composer? You know what I mean? Like, am I playing the AI or am I playing with the AI?
Let me I'd say something here. So I kind of feel that maybe it's more like a tool. Like I feel that we are playing with it. Um, I think one thing that can be at the heart of this question is how we actually evaluate these generations, right? Is it agnostic to who created it, or it's who the creation of it, like who created it defines actually what it means. So sometimes it can be true, this can be true in some cases, but may not be true in other situations, right? One agnostic way to think about art or music is to see how far they can be constructing. Maybe one thing, how capable they are of constructing emotional experiences. and how high is the magnitude of these emotional experiences. Like I can appreciate a piece of art if it makes me feel like happy, but also maybe if there's a difficult situation, like maybe the artistic piece about the war in Ukraine, I will still appreciate the meaning that it has. So I think the more meaning it might have, the more it can be appreciated, and the more, in addition to that, how how novel it is compared to what's out there, because people also want to see things that convey meanings in a creative way. So defining that can be somehow agnostic to the construction of emotional experience, can be agnostic to who created it, but this can be difficult to happen with the current state of the technology, because we understand the context of the maybe the world problems that but machine doesn't, right? So we communicate with each other, we know the history, we can relate to it, and this might, I think it's we're not in a state where we can say that like these generated are like pieces are aware about the historical context and are aware about emotion, are aware about the history. They need they need to be more social, and I think this is kind of connected to Aaron Hertzman article about can computers generate art, where he was arguing that maybe it's not now, but this might change in the future if computers gets more and more social and more understanding about what's going on. And this, in his view, I think may not happen anytime soon. I don't know.
I want to also like know like if there. I'm curious to know like if from music perspective, it's the same thing or not. Like I mean, is it like this AI is serving as a partner in or like collaborator in the process, or it's more just as a tool there?
Yeah, I think it's what's exciting about the AI song contest is you really see this range, and I think that's kind of reflective of how different artists have very different approaches to writing music. For example, some artists might like singer songwriter might start with like really trying to get a hook, like a nice kind of like it could be melody or it could be harmony, but a nice idea, like kind of really crafting it. Versus like some artists are kind of a more of a kind of a curator, like or maybe like a music producer, who's like have getting the models to generate a lot of raw material and then curating which are the interesting moments and trying to get more of that and then crafting it into a story. And then there's like kind of meta creation where there's this team that did this really interesting work called like kind of inspired by Art Breeder and Game Breeder, kind of this human in the loop kind of curation where like the feedback goes into the system and then it generates like kind of more generations towards that direction. And so they built like a synth breeder, which is kind of evolving how modular synthesizers are connected to each other and judging the output and then like kind of mutating this whole system. So
I see.
so yeah, so
How,
there's
how, is, how is the human in the loop? Like, how is this process happening in their case?
yeah,
Uh,
so in that case, so it's basically based on evolutionary algorithms, like genetic algorithms, where the genome is how the connections between the modules and parameters set on the module, and then the human evaluation is listening to a bunch of the output and deciding like, yeah, which is the direction you want to go, and like
Mhm.
those would be like the more fit ones.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt the question. Uh, so this like all these tools are bringing so much power, and also like scaling them, making them more available. That we had conversation around would even make it more powerful. So could they have like social impact on our societies, and also how this social impact is different on different communities? Like could some communities or like maybe some artists or some cultures um, be more impacted than the others? And yeah, I would like to actually like have your opinions around this question based on your experiences or research.
Well, looking into how like general sort of machine learning tools are not accessible to everyone, depending on how much power, I suppose, like computational power people can afford. Perhaps the accessibility, like there's this digital divide. Only people in like who can actually afford machinery and also afford the skills, because you have to be attached to like an engineer who can actually tweak these parameters. It's like a cost to it. Perhaps some communities or a lot of the communities won't have access to that, given that there's not a lot of machine learning engineers and machine learning engineers in this niche space with these skills who can actually tweak. And but I suppose I'm not sure about scaling it through the world, but then this is just the immediate one that I see.
I mean, I'm also reminded of this idea of, I mean, if you look at the history of hip hop, for example, that was, you know, scratching and DJing came out of exactly recite to what you were saying. The economic exclusion led to the innovation of using turntables and records, and these shitty records that were not in good shape became an integral part of the music, and as a mode of resistance and as a mode of recycling cultural forms into new cultural forms. But you know, to me, it's this human resistance to technology, and like there's this interesting interplay. And I agree with you where the current systems are, it'd be hard to how do you subvert these technologies and reuse them, and I think some artists are trying to play with this, but like we've been pointing out, currently you need these massive compute farms to do these models, and like how would you give how would people take over access of that, or like I think a lot of music, or at least music from different communities, has been a form, you know, it's been a form of like using the tools we have to make something new, and use that as a way of communicating community and togetherness in rhythms and different things, but as a form of collective identity building and resistance. So that'd be interesting to explore the modalities that might happen with this technology. It's hard to see how that would happen, given that, like you were saying, the concentration of who owns these tools or who owns this tech right now.
Anna, go first, please.
Yeah, I feel like the barrier is yeah, quite serious. For example, like in the song contest, the second year and right now the third year, it became an international contest. So we have teams from all over the world participating. So and they're bringing their own musical tradition. And so, for example, we had a team from Korea and another team from Thailand. The first difficulty they had is they weren't able to use any of the pre-trained models, because the pre-trained models were not trained on their the music that they wanted to write. So they really had to start from scratch, and data curation, like trying to build a model that was representative of the kinds of music that they wanted to write, and the kinds of emotions they wanted to express, was the core of the work. And it was a really interesting process because, yeah, emotion is something really abstract. So they actually use the data curation process to kind of calibrate among the team members also, to kind of figure out like, yeah, what is it in the music that actually is conveying this that we want to hear. And then there's things like music from different cultures have very different tuning systems, and often the pre-trained models we have is in a fixed Western scale. So it actually makes it really hard to even break these models or kind of rebel against these models, because it's so baked into the design from the beginning.
it was a really, really interesting point. My question is actually like a little bit related to the conversation that Raiseja and Andy brought up about computational power, or like maybe this like machine learning expertise to have. I want to ask the question from Mohammed and Anna on this like evaluations and judges. Like you actually like you discuss about this like evaluation aspects or like judging this kind of systems. Are the systems usually judged based on the technological sophistication of the approach or the amount of computational power that's used to generate that piece? Or it's more on like traditional creativity and art of an artist, or it's a combination of both? And then how is this like middle ground, or where do you think would be a fair middle ground?
Um, so I think this has been an open question for many years already. The evaluation. So I can speak about visual art, and maybe Anna can follow up on how it's done in music. But I've been struggling with this, to be honest. Like maybe yeah. But I said at the beginning, hey, let's ask people how like how for evaluation of art works, how much whether they like it or not, or something like have a rating from most people. Do most people like this artwork or something, or maybe some um, another thing that we tried recently is how do we evaluate meaningfulness of the generated artworks, and in order to do that, one thing we did is to collect actual emotional responses. Does this generated artistic piece makes you feel something? And they have to pick one of maybe nine, like eight emotions, but you can also choose that I don't feel anything. And then we ask also people to explain if the generated art work, like why did they pick, do they think this emotion is being constructed? And then for each uh, for each emotion category, we analyze what are the most frequent words that people say about this. So this is one way we thought to measure the meaningfulness, and to appreciate, to also measure the magnitude of the experience. We ask people how much they like it, and give the ratings from 45. In the creativity axis, we measure the nearest neighbor distance to the closest painting in the training data, and then we try to see, when we compare different machine learning models, we'll try to see which one at a specific distance, which machine learning model produces images that construct more emotional experiences of a higher magnitude, like likability magnitude. So this is the reason I would say, but I didn't like this is what we did, let's say, over the past year or something like that. But we have been struggling. I'm still not sure what the right thing is. This is from research and paper perspective. Another aspect is actually uh, get expert opinions, and we have opportunity to do that in meetups and workshops. But sometimes it gets hard. It's difficult to get access to experts. That's the. But this is pretty much the latest I have tried, and yeah, still I think there's still room to improve.
That's super super cool. I just want to mention in my one point in my that I resonate with a lot. It's also something I'm working on in my own research, is to kind of evaluate model improvements and new interfaces based on like how well they can help somebody communicate um, something emotional, and then we try to evaluate it based on, for example, how listeners are actually able to kind of perceive like the music created with the person created with like this tool actually was more it was more possible to kind of evoke a kind of deeper connection between like the emotion and music. So that's really really cool. To hear that you that this is yeah, this is very much kind of part of the core of your evaluation. For the AI song contest, we have something kind of pretty similar. So half of the points are from public audience participation. So they vote for the songs, and they express like how much they like the song, how creative they think novel the song is, and if they would recommend the song to their friends.
People's choice.
Yes, people's choice. So half of the points comes from a people's choice,
Right.
and then half of the points come from experts. So we have a panel of this year we have 20 experts reviewing the entries, and then a second stage of 8 experts kind of picking the finalists. And as part of that evaluation process, is we actually ask participants to do a write up on their process, so that we're actually able to go behind the scenes and know what was the process itself. So for the experts judging it, we have kind of 4 components to the rubric. So one is like the song itself, like just evaluate it as if like you don't know it was any AI involved tools were involved, just like the song itself. And then there's 2 components of did the use of the AI tools really help push the creative boundary, to really help kind of achieve a new kind of musical expression, a new musical experience that you can hear and feel. And then the second one is more about the workflow. So maybe the music didn't sound really different or new, but by using AI tools, it enabled a very different kind of workflow, enabled people to work differently than before, then we also value that. And then the last part of the rubric is how the teams really are kind of thinking carefully about kind of data curation, kind of the ethics and ethical considerations and cultural considerations. Nigar.
A very related question. So I wanted to talk about like authorship and how does this technologies affect the idea of authorships, and like what's the role of artists here, like how much involvement of the artist is valued, and also like what's the authorship of the artist in the process. Maybe I will start with Andy because we had this conversation before.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think it relates to the problem of novelty in a way, because I think if you have something that's so novel or new or different, then it's so far outside your experience, you have no way to evaluate it. So, I mean, it's my Celeste kid, who's a psychologist, does some research on this where, you know, if she reads a book about gardening in Dutch, she doesn't know anything about gardening or doesn't speak Dutch. She just can't comprehend it. But if she reads like an ABC book to her 4-year-old, it's just boring because it's so familiar. But there's this kind of sweet spot between this is so different, I cannot comprehend it, to this is so familiar and routine, it's boring, where there's something that has to hit this sweet spot of novelty that I recognize it as novel, but I'm able to recognize it because it fits within some framework that touches me, that I can comprehend. And I think the role of the artist, sometimes the great artists are able to live in that space of, this is a new thing I made. You get it, but you get it's novel, but it's not like, and I think maybe if you think about like John Cage or some of Philip Glass's work, where to a lot of people, it's just like, or like the famous sit down at the piano and sit there for 4 minutes and not do anything, like the silence piece, as one extreme of expression, where people who understand the history and the movement he's speaking to think that's a genius comment. And you know what I mean? Like other people are like, this is so weird, I don't even know what's going on. So I'm really I think in what's interesting about the AI part is also subverting maybe the paradigm of authorship and the artist, like, because it becomes very ambiguous what the locus of creativity is in response to these systems. And then, as I mentioned to this Alex Rebin, who does these works where he uses, a lot of these GAN models to generate designs, where he then sends, to actual human artists, pays them. They very carefully recreate the designs of the thing and then send the physical paintings back, and he sells those. But then it's not clear who what or who the artist is in these cases. So I definitely think going forward, this question of authorship and who the musician is, and maybe this paradigm of like great artists will be undermined in some interesting way.
But I suppose if we view them as tools, then it shifts the whole who's the author. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the artist or the machine learning engineer still decides how to tweak the parameters, which data goes in, and like things like that. But then even with like art, the like visual art that's generated, they still decide what input data to train the models using. They decide whether that piece is worth selling or not. Like they make the decisions on things like that. Otherwise, that same piece wouldn't have been created. So whoever is actually operating that whole process should be the author, I think, in my opinion.
I mean, I think, but I mean, like Brian Eno's work going back to the 70s, where he was doing these generative pieces, where he would just set up these different parameters and let the computer do the thing. You still think of it as Brian Eno's music, even though he's like, I just set it up and pushed a button and then it did it,
I have hundreds more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. I will ask just a few questions that I can't ask. Please let me know, like, if you have overlapping work. So my question is that, like, one of the questions is like very related to something that Anna brought up on having, like, I mean, some countries like Korea, for example, Koreans who were participating in your work, they needed to pre-train, like they couldn't use pre-trained models. It could be expanded to the computer vision side as well. Like many models, we are representing just like specific cultures. So I wanted to understand, like, to what extent is there this kind of like algorithms monocultural in this space, and what are the cultures which are best represented or like most represented, and then what are the cultures that might not get enough representation in this space? And then I have another follow-up question. Who wants to start? Raisija, I mean, maybe I will start with you first.
Yeah, I suppose this is like a very general question to other machine learning problems. Some models are trained on data sets from the West or from like developed places, and then they just don't fit in other places. And then now the question is, do we also like take up the cost of creating those data sets and then having skills to create those models for that space, or do we just accept that that's just for that space, and they won't serve the other communities? So I think that's actually quite a big question, like for these musical sort of models that are created using tunes or like sounds from specific places, mostly because data sets are there and there's interest and there's a financial investment to that. What about the other cultures? Like, what are we optimizing for? Do we want to give these tools to everyone? Is that the aim? Should we make investments accordingly? Or are we saying that other people can also just invent their own things? Like, I suppose that's the bigger question. Like, should we be distributing these models to everyone? or if there's an interest, how do they participate, kind of thing.
I also have like a follow-up question on this, that like if we improve the representation, so imagine that we are creating data sets which are representing also other cultures, could we also face like some harms like cultural appropriation to just like use one specific culture or like mix it with that other culture in a way which might not be appropriate? Like how could we improve these representations without actually harming those cultures or misrepresenting them? It's might be like a very big question for like final question, but would love to hear your opinions.
It feels tricky, actually. I think maybe taking care of that in the data collection stage for longer, so that we each culture, for example, speaks for itself, like who's speaking for each other. I think that's the point. So let's say I learned a new language, right? And let's say I learned the Chinese. I still cannot speak for Chinese culture or things like that. So I think maybe the data collection itself needs to be more collected more properly in a way that is more representative. I think apart from that, I feel that the representation itself is a little bit challenging. I think there's always a problem, I would say. The how much is the data is representing for, let's say, men versus women, for different ethnic groups and stuff like that. So this takes, I would say, a lot of effort in mind, so that by design the data itself is more representative for everyone, and it's a continual effort, I would say. I feel it's hard to say, hey, we are done. This is AI is now not biased. Like, I guess this is a continual journey.
Yeah, I think
suppose-
one. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say that I suppose some responsibility should be placed on developers, like people who develop these models and these systems, to also think about like ways to easily integrate other people in their designs. So now, if I'm a machine learning sort of engineer, I'm creating these designs. How do I think about an easy way to integrate, like the input layer? How do I think about making it accessible to other people? How do I make it robust and sort of so, not just one format, not just one sound? How do I make it a little bit more robust to other cultures as well, so that we can make it easy to integrate? I mean, people have like huge data sets of like CDs and albums, different records in different places. So how do I design models that are easy to input and retrain and things like that, more than, I mean, it's going to slow down creating models that work really well, that specialize, but then they'll be a little bit more robust and accepting of. Actually, that maybe could be another sort of evaluation sort of technique for like competitions, to sort of create a culture of sort of distributing the knowledge or the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring up too, there's still this tension, I think, and you see this with large language models that are trying to incorporate more and more languages, and this question of who who owns the language. And there's a lot of indigenous groups who want to use NLP technology, for example, for preservation, but then are very much against having their language like taken into these giant models and allowing companies to make money, etc., on that data. So to me it's a similar tension to this debate around cultural appropriation. And I probably the if you think of the Stones and Led Zeppelin taking American blues music and then using, then they kind of made it different and then got very huge and wealthy. And then there's this question of artistic, because that is the very definition of artistic expression. You're obviously influenced by things and then you create something new. And this question of how do you do that sensitively and responsibly and avoid this dynamic of appropriation of, blues music was this, expression of pain and misery and like that experience. And then, it's great music, but then like it gets used and recycled. And then in these, so how, I feel like in machine learning is directly learning these patterns and then recycling it into new patterns. So there's this, it's a very interesting tension to me between representation and exploitation, or like, how do we do that in an equitable way where everyone's participating in a more democratic format, and it's not some powerful thing using a less, you know what I mean? Like using less powerful in a way to benefit itself. Like who benefits in the end from these relationships, I guess, is the key question.
Thank you so much for all these wonderful discussions. As I said, I have thousands more questions to ask, but yeah, I don't want to go that much over time. Thank you for participating, and have a wonderful day.
So much.
Oh,
Thanks,
thank you.
Nagar. Organizing. Thanks.
Thank you, Nigar, Ramya, for organizing.
Thank you.
Thank you.